Mr. Saran, I wanna actually ask you the same question that Isabel asked on a panel yesterday, and then we also asked our economics minister a similar question, and Isabel asked the question is, who's waiting for Europe? So, and then I continued at the question, who's waiting for Germany? And Robert Habeck seemed to think that everyone's waiting for Germany to take back our global leader role. What do you think?
Look, we are betting on Germany. I truly believe that this continent and the Indian future is deeply interlinked. But I don't believe Europe is betting on the rise and the emergence of India and some other actors. Europe has firmly resolved, the Europe businesses have firmly anchored themselves to China's future, and they are stubbornly refusing to move away from that direction. They are not expeditionary enough to look at the new opportunities that are arising in different parts of the world, and they are playing very safe. Someone was talking about growth, right? Well, you don't grow if you take 2 months off every year. It's impossible to meet anyone between July and August in this continent, in this part of the world. You're not going to grow if you're going to be sleeping for 2 months in a year. People ask me, how is India growing at 8%? We work many hours a day.
Well, you're going actually quite deep into our, I guess, society order.
No, there's just a comment from the previous panel, where one of the panelists had emphasized on growth. I think Europe needs, the only resource Europe is lacking today is not critical minerals, it's critical thinking. Europe is one of the largest economies. It is powerful, it can define the future, it can shape the agenda, and yet it allows itself to be browbeated by anyone and everyone into following other people's lead. I think Europe needs to have an identity in a sense of self that is commensurate with the $20 trillion constellation that it represents. And I think that is missing in Europe. We are waiting for that Europe, and we are betting on that Europe. And we hope Europe notices that there is a subcontinent of 1.5 billion people that is moving from $4 trillion to $10 trillion in the next 10 years. And that offers an opportunity so that you can get over your China addiction, you can start diversifying, and you can start betting on right people and nice people.
Well, I guess I'm also quite sure there's also nice people in China. So just to make that point clear. So Benedikt Franke, you are, I guess, like I said, you're CEO of Munich Security Conference. You had a conference earlier this year that was not easy because the times are very critical. When you look back at it now, is, let's say, the rising of other countries the most interesting that we've been seeing? Maybe we start there.
Can I start by saying how much I love being on a panel with Samir, because he's probably the only one that makes me look quite insane, which is absolutely fantastic. Thanks, Samir. Yeah, so the Munich Security Conference 2024 was all about the need to include the Global South. Yeah. For us, it wasn't as much the invasion of Ukraine that was the wake-up call. It was really the UN General Assembly vote a week later, where we were all thrilled that 142 countries said, no, it's not okay to attack and kill your neighbor. And, 5 countries, the usual suspects, said, no, perfectly all right to invade and kill your neighbor. But it was 38 countries representing more than half the world's population that abstained. They all abstained for different reasons. But at the end of the day, I think it's pretty clear to say that more than half of the world currently doesn't believe in the global order that we've become addicted to. Mm-hmm. And the Munich Security Conference tries to do its part in, trying to figure out why that is the case. And what do these 38 countries really have in common? Mm-hmm. That's not a lot. Mm-hmm. So there isn't a consolidated global South.
Maybe we jump there. What do they have in common?
I think they have a frustration in common. They have a legitimate concern in common that the global order does not work for them, in fact, structurally disadvantages them. And I think they also have a narrative in common. First of all, this rules-based international order that we all love, most of them weren't independent when the rules were made. Second, the rules don't work for them. Look at the different debt level and the money you need to get rid of that debt. And look at how we are adhering to the rules. Look at our double standards. Why do we treat, the ICC verdict against Putin differently from the one against Netanyahu? Why do we treat the war in Ukraine different from the war in Tigray? I mean, they have very, very clear...
Well, there are reasons, though.
They are, but the point is, we are not very good at explaining them, and we are not very good at taking them along, and we believe we need to get a lot better at taking them along.
And I'm also not saying we do not have double standards. I'm also quite sure that's the truth. When you looking from your perspective, like I said, from the outside in, is that something that you would subscribe to, that you said that's actually what's happening?
No, actually, these were my notes that he read out. So
you're welcome.
These were exactly my thoughts as well on the commonality between those who don't necessarily agree with you. It is a genuine grievance against how A, the rules have been framed, B, how they have been implemented, and C, who has been given exemptions from following those rules. If you are sitting in my part of the world, for me, the problem did not begin with Ukraine. It actually began with Afghanistan. That was highly problematic. That you did a deal with the devil, and then you left a country overnight, and then your agencies return there and they demand women's rights. What were you expecting when you did the deal with the government that is in charge of Kabul? You were expecting them to be promoting women's rights? I mean, this is ridiculous, right? So you knew what you were getting into. You closed your eyes because it was expedient to leave Kabul, and you walked away overnight, and you had those terrible scenes out of Afghanistan. For me, that was problematic. But location matters. So if I get more affected based on what happens in my neighborhood, and similarly you get affected what's happening in Ukraine. The distance is pretty much the same between Delhi and Kabul and Berlin and the borders with Russia. So my point here is that there is a genuine problem. We have a problem. We have to first admit that the rules that were framed have served the first billion well. 500 million in the Atlantic system, that is the Americans and some Europeans, and 500 million collateral beneficiaries, some in China, some in India, some in other parts of the world. But basically it has served a billion elite of the world well, and it has not served the next 7.5 billion. Those next 7.5 billion are now demanding a reset. Now, either you allow for that reset and have a new conversation, for example, the G20, which has now become a more important body than the G7, for example. I'm just giving you one of the examples where a much larger constellation of actors are speaking, or create new institutions where one country, one vote becomes the norm. But you cannot have the victors of World War II and the colonial powers of that era define our lives. Okay. For me, the UN Security Council represents the continuation of a colonial project. Colonial powers and their allies are still the ones who sit on that particular council. And for me, that is exactly the council that needs to be demolished if a new world order and new rules need to emerge.